One of the very first things you'll discover about Transformers once you scratch beneath the surface is there are a lot of different stories, like a scary amount. So one of the first questions you're likely to have is, how do they all fit together? What do the movies have to do with the cartoon that's on TV right now? And what does that cartoon have to do with the one my parents or older siblings watched when they were kids? And what about the comics? How does it all connect? The short answer is, it doesn't. Okay, I know that's not the answer you were looking for, so here's the long version. Unlike other long-running franchises like Star Wars, there's no singular Transformers canon. There's no one big overarching timeline that every story fits into. Transformers gets reimagined and rebooted all the time, every couple of years, and with every major reboot, the story starts over again. And what that means is, there are always multiple versions of the Transformers story going on at the same time, which don't have anything to do with one another. And if that sounds confusing to you, well, you're not wrong. But it's been this way since the very beginning. For instance, back in the 1980s, the many children's storybooks that were published were never expected to keep their stories perfectly in step with the original comic book that was on shelves at the time, and neither was expected to share their continuity with the original cartoon. They were all based on the same toys, characters, and scenario, and basically, that was good enough for Hasbro. Otherwise, they each told the story in their own unique way, giving different roles and origins to different characters, and sometimes writing those characters' personalities quite differently.
And now, a nice and nifty musical selection for easy listening. Hold on to your dancing shoes and go, man, go!
The end result is, there are many different separate Transformers continuities. And because there's no singular canon, that means everything's canon. It's just that some stories are more significant than others. And some are incredibly minor, limited entirely to one children's book or a prose piece on a marketing flyer, and others are huge and far-reaching, spread across many different comics and cartoons, sometimes produced decades apart, sometimes branching off in separate directions. That means it's practically impossible to provide a complete list of every single Transformers continuity ever, but it is possible to draw dividing lines between those continuities, to group them into families, collections of similarly themed continuities, ones that are based on the same source material in a way that sets them apart from other stories. There are 6 major families, and we're going to run through them now. First up is Generation 1. The term Generation 1 was first coined by fans as a name for the original Transformers series of the 1980s, but today it's also come to be used to refer to the larger family of continuities in which that original series and several other series exist together. It's easily the largest of the 6 families, and it contains the broadest range of stories. The original Transformers franchise ran from 1984 to 1991 and introduced the world to Optimus Prime's Autobots and Megatron's Decepticons as they battled over the resources of Earth. Their adventures were chronicled in a lot of media, but the 2 principal pillars of the franchise were the Marvel comic book and the animated series and feature film. These 2 separate continuities were quickly supplemented by international spin-offs, including a British comic book that expanded the world of the Marvel series, and a run of Japanese-exclusive anime that continued the story of the cartoon after it ended. After the original series was over, the first direct sequel arrived in 1993, Transformers Generation 2. It was in fact in response to this rebranding that fans coined the term Generation 1 in the first place. After Generation 2 came what's referred to today as the Beast era, encompassing the Beast Wars and Beast Machines series, which ran from 1996 to 2001. These series featured the Maximals and Predacons, the descendants of the Autobots and Decepticons from a future where Transformers had mastered the ability to transform not just into machines, but organic creatures as well. Though set apart from the original series, both Generation 2 and the Beast era are inextricably tied to it, and hence still fall within the original Generation 1 family of stories. And of course, Generation 1 remains the backbone of much of the Transformers today. In addition to serving as constant inspiration for new incarnations of the franchise, new toys of the Generation 1 characters are regularly produced as part of the Transformers Generations toy line, and new Generation 1 stories are still being told. There have been new installments in the continuities begun in both the Marvel comic and the animated series, as well as the creation of brand new Generation 1 continuities, like the Combiner Wars cartoon, and most significantly, IDW Publishing's line of Transformers comic books. Our second family is Robots in Disguise. Not the Robots in Disguise cartoon that's on TV right now, but the original series by that name from 2001. As I mentioned earlier, in Japan, multiple anime were produced that expanded on the story of the Generation 1 cartoon, and following Beast Machines to fill for time during the production of the next series, Hasbro elected to import the last of these, a series known in Japan as Car Robots, about the Autobots battling the Predacons on present-day Earth, and dubbed it into English as Robots in Disguise. Though this dub did contain references to Generation 1 lore, it reinvented its cast and in particular reimagined Autobot leader Fire Convoy and Predacon leader Gigatron as new versions of Optimus Prime and Megatron themselves, essentially turning a story that had been part of the Generation 1 family in Japan into the first non-G1 Transformers story. Despite this, virtually all modern use of its characters takes place in Generation 1 themed stories anyway. RID, as it's known, has been a little bit overlooked by history as its own distinct entity. Next comes the Unicron trilogy, the first honest-to-goodness complete reboot of the entire Transformers universe. This continuity came into being as part of the early 2000s nostalgia boom that saw many other classic 1980s properties revived for modern audiences. The trilogy represented a greater level of co-production between America and Japan, and it rode the crest of the anime wave sweeping children's television at the time, with each portion of the trilogy consisting of a full-length anime series. The three series were only collectively named the Unicron trilogy after they had ended. The name refers to the significant role played by the world-devouring monster planet Unicron in all three of them. The story begins in Transformers Armada, which sees the Autobots and Decepticons, led by new incarnations of Optimus Prime and Megatron, fighting for control of the small, power-enhancing robots known as the Minicons. It then continues into Transformers Energon, a direct sequel in which the war is fought over control of the super-powerful element Energon, and concludes in Transformers Cybertron, in which the Autobots and Decepticons race to obtain the magical Cyber Planet keys to close a black hole threatening to destroy their homeworld. There was also a comic book version of the trilogy published by Dreamwave Productions, but the company's closure resulted in its premature ending before Energon was even completed. Next on the list, the movies, which don't need much elaboration. With nearly $4 billion worldwide gross, I think they speak for themselves. But the movieverse does serve as a good example of how Transformers continuity works when there's only one central pillar to a franchise. The Beast era has something similar going on. Unlike Generation 1, where there were multiple versions of the story from the very start, here the cartoons, or in this case the films, are treated as the core of the franchise, with the result that most new stories told in those franchises are set between movies, episodes, or even scenes. And these spin-off stories will often contradict one another, yes, but like we said, since there's no one true canon in Transformers, it doesn't mean they're non-canon, it just means they're off in their own branching continuity. Because you can be pretty sure the films are never going to take their events into account. At number 5, Transformers Animated, a short-lived but much-loved continuity that reimagined Transformers on television in the wake of the first live-action movie's success. Set in an era after the Autobot-Decepticon war has already ended, Animated reimagines Optimus Prime as the young and inexperienced leader of a team of insubordinate Autobots acting as superheroes on 22nd century Earth. Animated's another example of a Transformers franchise with a singular central version of its story, the cartoon, and pretty much all other media spins off from its events. And lastly, the Aligned continuity, the most recent Transformers continuity. This family is so named for its attempts to align the many different versions of the Transformers story by cherry-picking the best characters and ideas from all previous series and combining them into one unified vision for the brand. Most modern Transformers media outside the films and IDW's Generation 1 comics exists in this universe, including the War for Cybertron and Fall of Cybertron video games, which take a lot of inspiration from Generation 1, and the Transformers Prime, Rescue Bots, and 2015 Robots in Disguise cartoons. But rather than tell different versions of the same fundamental story, again as with Generation 1, the aim of the Aligned continuity is to tell one huge ongoing story across all the different media. But due to the freedoms afforded to each project's individual creative team, not every precise detail lines up between every series. As design director Aaron Archer said at the time, it all lines up if you squint, and like I said earlier, that's good enough for Hasbro. So, those are the 6 main families. But it's important to realise that there's constant cross-pollination between them. Good ideas and good characters from one family are regularly adapted across the lines into another family. And not every single Transformers story fits neatly into one of these 6. There are numerous smaller, more obscure corners of the franchise, off in their own world, their own family. But the important stories, the ones you'll see in mass-market television, film and comic, all generally do. But then again, who knows? A new cartoon with its own brand new continuity family could pop up tomorrow. Transformers continuity is ever-changing and ever-growing. This has been episode 1 of the Basics, an entry-level series designed for new Transformers fans. See you next week for episode 2, in which we'll be looking at how characters work across all these different continuities and families. Hit the subscribe button so you don't miss it, and share the show with your friends who are looking to learn more about the world of the Transformers.